Rain fell sideways across the rocky hills of Outpost Greth, driven by wind that howled through broken metal towers left over from an old mining project. Daniel Cole pulled his jacket tighter and kept walking, his boots sinking into wet gravel. He was not looking for anything special that night. He was only checking the old fences before the storm grew worse. The sky flashed green for a moment, a color no storm on this moon should ever make. Daniel stopped and looked up. Something large and dark had crossed through the clouds, moving fast, and then it was gone. He told himself it was nothing. Out here, on the edge of human space, strange lights in the sky were common enough. Ships passed overhead all the time, and storms played tricks with the eyes. Then he heard the crash. It was not the sound of falling metal. It was softer and heavier, like something alive hitting the ground hard. Daniel turned toward the sound, his heart beating fast. He should have gone back to his shelter. He should have reported it to the outpost office. Instead, he walked toward the smoke rising from a shallow crater near the old mining road. When he reached the edge of the crater, he stopped completely still. Lying in the mud was a creature unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It was small, no bigger than a large dog, with scales that shimmered blue and green even in the dark. One of its wings was bent at a wrong angle, and its sides moved fast with quick, frightened breaths. Its eyes, wide and gold, looked straight at him. Daniel knew what it was. Everyone on the frontier knew the stories. Dragonkin, the old and powerful species that lived beyond the border, a species humans had learned, through hard lessons, never to approach. There were laws against contact. Captain Reyna Voss, who ran the frontier defense post nearby, had said it plainly more than once. If you ever see one of them, you walk away and you call it in. No exceptions. But this was not a full-grown dragon ready to burn a village to ash. This was a baby, alone, hurt, and shaking in the rain. Daniel crouched slowly, keeping his hands where the creature could see them. "Easy," he said quietly, though he doubted it understood a single word. "I am not going to hurt you." The baby dragon let out a small, broken sound, somewhere between a growl and a whimper. It tried to pull itself away, but its injured wing gave out, and it fell back into the mud with a pained cry. Daniel looked around. No ships, no search parties, no sign of a mother, or of anyone at all. Whatever had happened up in that storm, this small creature had been thrown far from wherever it belonged, and it was alone in a place full of humans who feared its kind. He thought about walking away. He thought about it for a long moment, standing there in the rain with the smoke curling around his boots. Reporting it was the safe choice. The authority would send soldiers, and soldiers would either kill it or lock it away, and either way, it would not matter to Daniel once it was out of his hands. But the creature was still watching him, breathing hard, clearly too weak and too scared to fight. It was not a monster. It was a hurt, frightened animal. Daniel took off his jacket and moved closer, slow enough that the creature had time to pull away if it wanted to. It did not pull away. It watched him with those wide gold eyes, and when he laid the jacket gently over its back, it did not fight him at all. It only shivered and let out a long, tired breath. "All right," Daniel muttered, mostly to himself. "All right, I've got you." He was not a big man, and the creature was heavier than it looked, but he managed to lift it into his arms. Its body was warm, warmer than it should have been in such cold rain, and Daniel could feel its heart beating fast against his chest as he carried it back toward his shelter. The walk back felt longer than it should have. Every gust of wind made him flinch, half expecting to see shapes moving in the storm, searching. But nothing came. No shadows in the sky. No cries answering the one this baby must have made when it fell. Only rain and wind and the quiet weight in his arms. Inside his shelter, Daniel laid the creature down on an old blanket near the heater. He dug through his supplies for anything that might help. Bandages, a medical kit meant for humans, but better than nothing, clean water. The dragon watched him work, flinching whenever he touched the bent wing, but never once tried to bite or claw at him. By the time he finished wrapping the wing, the storm outside had grown worse, rain hammering against the shelter walls. The baby dragon's breathing had slowed, and its eyes, heavy and tired, began to close. Daniel sat back and looked at what he had done. He had broken the law. He had hidden a dragon kin in his own home, on a night when the sky itself seemed to be searching for something. Far off, beyond the storm, a sound rolled across the hills, low and deep and full of grief. It was not thunder. Daniel had never heard thunder that sounded like a scream. He looked down at the sleeping creature curled against his blanket, and he understood, without needing to be told, exactly what that sound meant. Somewhere out there, something was looking for her, and he had already found her first. 3 days passed before the small dragon opened her eyes without fear in them. Daniel had barely slept during that time. He kept the heater running through the nights, checked her wing every few hours, and fed her small amounts of dried meat from his own stores, unsure if it was even the right food for a creature like her. She ate anyway, slowly at first, then with more hunger each day, as if her body had decided to trust him even before her mind caught up. He had not left his land once. Not to check the fences, not to visit the small trading post 2 hours south, not even to answer the short message Captain Voss had sent asking why his supply drone had not checked in. He told himself he was only being careful. In truth, he was afraid of what would happen the moment he stepped away from her. By the 4th day, the wing had begun to heal enough that she could stretch it without crying out. She spent most of her time curled near the heater, watching Daniel with a kind of quiet curiosity, tilting her head whenever he spoke, as if trying to understand the strange sounds coming from him. "You need a name," Daniel said one evening, sitting across from her with a cup of hot tea he had let go cold an hour ago. "I can't keep calling you the dragon in my own head. Makes me feel like I'm hiding a bomb in here." The creature blinked at him, and a thin curl of pale smoke drifted from her nose, so light it looked almost like breath on a cold morning. Daniel laughed, surprised. "There. That's it. Wisp." He said the word again, slower. "Wisp." She made a small sound, somewhere between a chirp and a growl, and shifted closer to him across the blanket. It was not much, but it was enough for Daniel to believe, foolishly perhaps, that she liked the name. Over the following days, Wisp grew stronger, and with her strength came small signs of what she truly was. A flick of her tail could knock over a full water container from across the room. A puff of frustration, when Daniel accidentally stepped on her tail, sent a spark of heat into the air that left a faint scorch mark on the floor. She was young, clumsy, and utterly unaware of her own power, but the power was there, waiting to grow. Daniel found himself talking to her more than he talked to anyone else on the outpost. He told her about his life before Greth, about the family he had left behind on a colony 3 systems away, about why he had chosen to live alone on the edge of nowhere instead of somewhere safer. She could not understand the words. He was almost certain, but she listened anyway, her gold eyes following his face as he spoke. It was on the 7th evening that Ivo, his closest neighbor, an old man who ran a small equipment repair shop a few kilometers down the road, came knocking on his door. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. He shoved Wisp behind a stack of crates, told her to stay low with a hand gesture she seemed to somehow understand, and opened the door only wide enough to block the view inside. "You've gone quiet," Ivo said, squinting past him. "No calls, no visits. Voss sent someone to check on you. Did you know that? Said your drone hasn't reported in days." "I've been under the weather," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. "Storm knocked out a few systems. I'm fixing it." Ivo studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that came from years of reading people on a frontier where trust was rare and lies were common. "You smell like smoke," he said finally. "Cooking accident," Daniel replied quickly. Too quickly. There was a pause. Behind him, faint and almost silent, came the soft scrape of claws against the floor. Daniel's stomach dropped. But Ivo only shook his head, muttering something about young people and bad cooking, and turned to leave. "Come by if you need anything," he said over his shoulder. "And answer your comms next time. People worry." Daniel shut the door and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. When he turned around, Wisp had crept out from behind the crates and was sitting in the middle of the room, watching him with what almost looked like guilt. "That was close," he told her, crouching down to check that she had not moved during the healing process. "We need to be more careful. If people find out you're here, it won't just be me in trouble. It'll be you too." He did not tell her the rest of what worried him. That somewhere beyond the border, whatever had cried out into that storm was still searching, and that search would not stop just because one small human had decided to hide its lost child. He did not know, not truly, what kind of storm he had invited into his life. He only knew that each day Wisp grew stronger, and each day made walking away from her harder to imagine. That night, after the shelter had gone dark and quiet, Wisp curled against his side the way she had begun doing since her wing healed enough to move freely. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her slow, steady breathing. Far to the north, past the border no human dared cross without permission, something vast moved through the dark sky, wings beating against the wind, eyes scanning every valley and ridge for a small shape that was not there. The search had not slowed. It had only grown more desperate. Mountains that no human map had ever fully charted rose beyond the northern border, their peaks wrapped in clouds that never seemed to clear. Somewhere among those peaks stood a hall carved from black stone, old beyond memory, and inside that hall, Queen Naya had not slept in 6 days. She stood at the wide opening in the far wall, a gap large enough for her wings to pass through freely, and stared out at the storm-streaked sky. Her scales, usually a deep shade of violet that shimmered like a night sky full of stars, had dulled to a tired gray. Her advisors had stopped trying to convince her to rest. They knew better by now. "Nothing," said a voice behind her. It belonged to Corin, an older dragonkin who had served her family for 3 generations. The search parties returned an hour ago. No trace of her along the eastern ridges. Naya did not turn around, then send them west and south along the human border. "Your Majesty," Corin said carefully, "we have already searched the border twice. If she crossed into human territory, then we search again." Naya snapped, her voice cracking with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. "I will not stop searching for my daughter because it is inconvenient for our treaties with them." Corin bowed his head and said nothing more. There was nothing more to say. Everyone in the hall understood the same fear that gripped their queen, though few dared to speak it aloud. 6 days ago, during a storm ritual flight meant to teach the youngest dragonkin how to navigate rough winds, a sudden and unnatural surge of lightning had struck the formation. In the chaos, one small shape had vanished from the sky. The queen's daughter. Naya had searched every valley within 3 days' flight of where the young ones had scattered. She had sent her fastest riders along every ridge and river. She had questioned merchants, scouts, even a few cautious humans who traded along the border, all without a single answer that satisfied her. Grief and fear had begun to curdle into something else within her, something the older dragonkin recognized with growing unease. Anger, not the sharp, controlled anger of a ruler weighing a difficult decision, but the raw, desperate anger of a mother who could not find her child and had started to suspect the worst. "If the humans have taken her," Naya said quietly, almost to herself, "there will be no more treaties. There will be no more patience." Far to the south, in a very different kind of hall, Overseer Halvard sat behind a wide desk cluttered with reports, listening to much the same fear from an entirely different angle. "The dragonkin are mobilizing along the border," said the officer standing before him, a nervous young man from the Colonial Authority's intelligence office. "Increased flight patrols, aggressive posturing near 3 of our outposts. Captain Voss has requested additional defense units be moved into position." Halvard steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. He was not a soldier, and he had little interest in wars fought with weapons. His interests lay elsewhere, in leverage, in advantage, in the kind of power that came from knowing something no one else did. "Do we know what triggered this?" he asked. "Rumors," the officer admitted. "Something about a missing dragonkin. Possibly young. Possibly important." Halvard's eyes sharpened at that. "Important how?" "Unconfirmed, sir. But if the dragonkin are searching this hard, and this openly, it isn't a common creature they've lost." A slow, thin smile crossed Halvard's face, the kind of smile that had made more than one subordinate uneasy over the years. "Find out where it went missing," he said. "And find out quietly. If the dragonkin want something badly enough to risk war over it, I want to know exactly what that something is worth before anyone else does." Meanwhile, Captain Reyna Voss stood on the observation deck of the Frontier Defense Post, watching dark shapes circle the distant ridgeline through a pair of long-range scopes. She had served on the border for 9 years, long enough to know the difference between routine patrols and something far more dangerous. "They're not testing our defenses," she said to the officer beside her. "They're searching for something. Look at the pattern. Grid formation, Low altitude, methodical. That's not an attack pattern. That's a search pattern. Should we scramble our own patrols, Captain? No, she said finally. Hold position. Increase our own monitoring, but do not engage unless they cross the border directly. Whatever they're looking for, I want to know what it is before we do anything that might start a war we can't win. She lowered the scope and looked out at the darkening sky, where distant shapes still moved in slow, careful circles, searching every shadow, every valley, every place a small and frightened creature might hide. None of them, not the Queen in her mountain hall, not Halvard in his cluttered office, not even Captain Voss on her quiet observation deck, knew that the answer they all searched for in different ways was resting peacefully that very night, safe and warm, in the small shelter of a quiet scavenger near Outpost Greth. The trouble started with a drone that flew too low over Daniel's land. He noticed it first because Wisp noticed it first. She had been dozing near the window in the late afternoon light, her wing now fully healed and strong enough that she had started testing short, clumsy flights around the inside of the shelter, much to the annoyance of anything left on a high shelf. Suddenly her head snapped up, ears flat, a low growl building in her throat as she stared out the window toward the sky. Daniel followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. A small surveillance drone, the kind used by the Colonial Authority for property inspections, hovered near the edge of his land, its lens turned directly toward his shelter. "Get down," he said sharply, and for once Wisp did not need the hand signal to understand. She ducked below the window without hesitation, years of learning his tone already built into whatever passed for instinct in a creature her age. The drone lingered for almost a full minute before drifting away, back toward the main road. Daniel stood frozen at the window long after it had gone, his mind racing through every possible explanation. Property inspections were routine. They happened every few months. This did not have to mean anything. But 2 days later, a ground vehicle he did not recognize pulled up outside his shelter, and the man who stepped out of it was not wearing the plain gray uniform of a Colonial Authority inspector. Daniel recognized the insignia on the man's jacket immediately, a stylized flame inside a circle, the mark of Halvard Consortium, one of the largest private contractors operating along the frontier border. He had heard the name before, always in tones of quiet caution. Halvard's people did not ask questions. They found answers, one way or another, and they did not always care how. "Mr. Cole," the man said, his voice pleasant in a way that did not reach his eyes. "My name is Reeve. I work for Overseer Halvard's office. We've had some reports of unusual energy readings coming from this property. Heat signatures, small combustion events, that sort of thing. Mind if I ask what's been going on out here?" Daniel kept his expression flat, years of frontier life having taught him how to hide, nerves behind a calm face. "Faulty generator," he said. "Been meaning to replace it." Reeve's smile did not change. Funny thing about faulty generators. They don't usually leave scorch patterns that match known dragon-kin combustion signatures. He let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching Daniel's face closely. "We're not here to cause trouble, Mr. Cole. Overseer Halvard is simply very interested in anything unusual happening near the border right now. Given the activity we've been seeing from the dragonkin lately, I'm sure you understand why." Daniel's mind raced. They knew, or at least suspected enough to come looking. Whatever answer he gave now would decide what happened next. "There's nothing here," he said carefully. "You're welcome to look around, but you're wasting your time." Reeves studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if he had expected exactly that answer. "Of course," he said. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Cole. Enjoy your evening." The vehicle pulled away, but Daniel did not relax. He had seen the way Reeves' eyes had drifted toward the shelter windows before he left, the faint, knowing look of a man who had not believed a single word. That night, Daniel packed a small bag with supplies, moving quickly and quietly while Wisp watched him with growing anxiety, sensing his fear even if she did not understand its cause. "We can't stay here," he told her, crouching down to meet her eyes. "They know something's wrong. If they come back with more people, or worse, if they figure out exactly what you are, they won't just ask polite questions anymore." He had heard enough stories about Halvard Consortium to know what they did with valuable things they found on the frontier. They did not report them to the proper authorities. They found ways to use them, to sell them, to turn them into leverage against whoever wanted them back badly enough to pay. And if Wisp truly was as important as the Dragonkin's search suggested, Halvard would see her as nothing more than the greatest bargaining chip he had ever found. Daniel had a choice to make, and he had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this moment was coming since the night he first carried her out of that crater. He could turn her over to Captain Voss and the Colonial Authority, trust the proper channels to handle things safely. He could keep hiding her here, hoping Halvard's people lost interest. Or he could do something far more dangerous, try to return her himself, cross the border alone, and hope that whatever waited for him on the other side valued the truth more than it valued revenge against the species that had, in its eyes, stolen a child. He looked at Wisp, now curled anxiously against his leg, her gold eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. "I'm not letting them use you," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Whatever happens next, I'm getting you home." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the distant, familiar sound of engines. Reeves' vehicle, or another like it, was returning far sooner than Daniel had expected. There was no more time to plan. There was only time to run. The old mining road had not seen this much traffic in years, and none of it belonged to Daniel. He ran with Wisp held tight against his chest, her wings pressed close to her body, her claws digging gently into his jacket as she sensed his urgency. Behind them, the lights of two vehicles swept across the hills, engines growling as they closed the distance far faster than a man on foot ever could. Daniel did not have a plan beyond reaching the border ridge, a jagged line of rock roughly 6 kilometers north that marked the edge of human territory. Beyond it lay land no Colonial Authority vehicle would dare cross without triggering an incident. It was not much of a plan. It was simply the only direction that offered any hope at all. "Stop where you are," a voice called out behind him, amplified through a vehicle speaker. It was Reeves' voice, no longer pleasant, now sharp with the tone of a man who had lost patience. "Mr. Cole, this can go easier than you're making it." Daniel did not stop. He pushed harder, lungs burning, boots slipping on loose gravel as the ground began to rise toward the ridge. Wisp let out a low, frightened sound, and he tightened his grip around her, murmuring words of comfort he was not entirely sure he believed himself. A shot rang out, not aimed at him. He realized a heartbeat later, but at the ground ahead, a warning meant to stop him without risking whatever Halvard's people believed Wisp to be worth. Daniel stumbled, caught himself, and kept running. He reached the ridge just as the first vehicle skidded to a stop at the base of the hill, its headlights cutting sharp lines through the darkness. Reeve climbed out, flanked by 2 armed men, all 3 of them starting up the slope after him. Daniel had nowhere left to run. The far side of the ridge dropped into a steep, rocky descent, far too dangerous to attempt at a full run, especially while carrying Wisp. He turned to face the men climbing toward him, placing himself between them and the small dragon trembling in his arms. "She's not a weapon," Daniel called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "She's a child. Whatever Halvard thinks he's going to gain from this, it isn't worth what's about to happen if you don't let us go." Reeve did not slow his approach. "Overseer Halvard doesn't share your concerns about consequences, Mr. Cole. Hand her over, and we'll see about letting you walk away from this." It was then that the sky changed. A deep, rolling roar split the night, so loud it seemed to shake the ground itself. Every man on that ridge froze, weapons forgotten, as a massive shadow blotted out the stars above them. Wings, each one longer than the vehicles parked below, cut through the dark air with terrible speed, and violet scales caught the moonlight as Queen Naya descended toward the ridge in a fury that had been building for 6 long days. She landed hard enough to crack stone, her massive form towering over the humans scattered below her, eyes blazing with a heat that promised violence. Reeves' men scrambled backward, weapons raised uselessly against a creature that could end them before a single shot found its mark. "Where is she?" Naya's voice rumbled, not a question but a demand, ancient fury barely contained beneath every word. "Which of you took my daughter?" Daniel's heart pounded so hard he could barely think, but he understood, in that terrifying instant, that this was the only moment he would get. He stepped forward, placing himself directly beneath the Queen's burning gaze, still holding Wisp carefully against his chest. "She's here," Daniel said, his voice shaking but clear. She's safe. I found her hurt, days ago, after she fell. I've been caring for her ever since. Naya's eyes snapped down to the small shape in his arms, and for a moment, the fury in her gaze wavered, replaced by something raw and desperate. Wisp, she breathed, the fierce edge in her voice cracking into something far more vulnerable. The baby dragon lifted her head at the sound, gold eyes widening with sudden recognition. She let out a joyful cry and pushed free of Daniel's arms, half stumbling, half flying across the short distance toward her mother, who lowered her massive head to meet her. For a long moment, nothing else in the world seemed to matter. Naya curled protectively around her daughter, a low, rumbling sound of relief vibrating through her chest, so different from the roar that had shaken the ridge only moments before. Then her eyes rose again, fixing on Daniel, and on the armed men still frozen behind him. "Explain," she said, her voice low and dangerous once more. "Why a human found my daughter days ago, and instead of using her against my people, chose to protect her." Reeve, sensing the shift in danger, tried to speak first. "Your Majesty, we can offer terms, an arrangement that benefits." Silence. Naya snapped, not even looking at him, her attention fixed entirely on Daniel. "I asked him." Daniel swallowed hard, aware of just how thin the line was between the fragile safety of this moment and complete disaster. "Because she was scared, and hurt, and alone," he said simply. "And because whatever's wrong between our people, that didn't seem like her fault, or mine." Silence stretched across the ridge, broken only by the wind and the quiet, contented sound of Wisp nuzzling against her mother's side. Word of what happened on the ridge spread faster than any official report could travel. By the time Captain Raina Voss arrived with a small unit of frontier defense soldiers, alerted by the sudden and unmistakable energy readings from a full-grown dragonkin landing so close to human territory, the situation had already resolved itself in a way none of her briefings could have prepared her for. She found Reeve and his men disarmed and kneeling under Naya's watchful gaze. Daniel standing quietly nearby with a small, exhausted dragon curled contentedly at his feet, and a queen who, despite everything, had not destroyed a single human life that night. Voss approached carefully, hands visible, every instinct honed by 9 years on the border screaming caution. "Your Majesty," she said, choosing her words with great care, "I am Captain Raina Voss, Frontier Defense. I was not aware of what these men were doing on this ridge tonight. I give you my word, this was not sanctioned by my post, nor by the colonial authority." Naya studied her for a long moment, violet eyes still sharp with the memory of 6 days spent in fear and grief. "Your man," she said, gesturing toward Reeve with obvious contempt, "believed my daughter was worth stealing for profit. Yet this one," her gaze shifted to Daniel, softening slightly, "found her broken and afraid, and chose to protect her, knowing full well what punishment your own laws might bring upon him for doing so." Voss glanced at Daniel, clearly putting pieces together she had not expected. "Is this true?" Daniel nodded, too tired for anything but honesty. "I found her hurt after she fell during the storm 6 nights ago. I should have reported it. I know that, but she was just a scared kid, and I couldn't make myself hand her over to be studied, or worse." Voss was quiet for a moment, weighing duty against what she had just witnessed. Then she turned back to Naya. "What Halvard's people attempted here was not authorized, and it will not go unanswered. I can promise you a full investigation and consequences for those responsible." "And the human who protected her?" Naya asked, her tone leaving little doubt about what answer she expected. Voss looked at Daniel again, at the scorch marks on his jacket, at the exhaustion clear in his eyes, at the way the young dragon had curled so trustingly against his leg without a hint of fear. "He'll answer to procedure," Voss said carefully, "but I think, given the circumstances, that answer is going to look a lot more like gratitude than punishment." In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened on that ridge became something far larger than a single frightened man and a lost child reunited under moonlight. Naya, whose fury could have easily reignited old wars between her people and humanity, instead chose to speak of the encounter publicly among her own kind, describing not the cruelty of Halvard's greed, but the quiet, unasked for kindness of one human who had risked everything for a creature he owed nothing to. It was not enough, on its own, to erase generations of distrust between dragon kin and humans. Old wounds did not heal in a matter of weeks, but it was enough to open a door that had been sealed for a very long time. A door through which careful, cautious conversations began to pass between Naya's court and the colonial authority, conversations that had never seemed possible before. Halvard, stripped of his position once the full truth of Reeves' actions came to light, found his consortium's operations along the border quietly, permanently shut down. Whatever plans he had once held for turning a lost child into leverage crumbled into nothing more than a costly, embarrassing failure. As for Daniel, he returned to his quiet life at Outpost Greth, though it was rarely quiet anymore. Wisp visited often, soaring down from the northern mountains whenever her mother allowed it, always landing with the same clumsy enthusiasm that had never quite left her, no matter how much stronger and steadier her wings became with each passing month. On one such visit, as autumn winds swept gently across the hills, Daniel sat outside his shelter watching Wisp chase a loose piece of scrap metal across the yard, her laughter, if it could be called that, echoing strangely but happily across the quiet land. Naya herself had come this time, landing at a respectful distance, her presence no longer a source of terror among the nearby settlements, but something closer to quiet reassurance. "You could have turned her over to your own authorities that first night," Naya said, watching her daughter play. "It would have been simpler, safer for you." Daniel shrugged, a small, tired smile on his face. "Wouldn't have felt right, though. She needed someone. I happened to be there." Naya's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, something unreadable passing behind her ancient eyes. "Simple reasons," she said finally, "often carry the greatest weight." Overhead, the sky remained clear and calm, no longer filled with the desperate search of a grieving mother, but with the easy, contented flight of a child who had found her way home, and the quiet, steady friendship of the human who had helped her get there.